The floor is open for other questions from the audience. Identify yourself.
I'm Lee Swigert from the Ethics Center. I have a question. Ambassador Corell, you said that you explained sort of what the parameters are of the internal justice system at the UN, which does not deal with complaints by third parties. But is there any international organization, or that any of you know, that has some sort of other justice mechanism that would deal with that without going to the domestic court systems of either the receiving or sending country?
No, sorry. No, I'm not aware of that. Basically, the courts operated for the UN. Other international organizations are also relying on that system. And then we have the ILO, the International Labour Organization. They also have a court system. So we try to sort of pool resources. But basically, these courts are set up for the simple reason that the UN has immunity. And if there is a case then, let us say between a staff member and the organization, the UN has to offer an independent court. That's the rule of law requirement. So this is why we have these institutions. But we should not mix them up with a court that decides about a dispute of the kind we heard here in Haiti, or whether it's a criminal case where we have to hand it over to a national court, as Richard Goldstone's 2 examples or 3 examples clarify. That's how it works.
Hi, my name is Jason Olson. I'm a 3rd-year PhD student in the Department of Near Eastern and Judaic Studies. And my question is mostly directed at Gillian, but also I think everyone will have interesting insights about repairing United States and United Nations relations. And, you know, it's been many decades since the passage of Resolution 3379 and the indignation of Ambassador Daniel Patrick Moynihan, and caused kind of a rupture in, I think, in American hopes for the UN. And I'm wondering how you see repairing U.S.-United Nations relations and since that time, and how the wounds that Americans perceive can be overcome from that many decades ago. Thank you.
Well, you're taking it back many years indeed. The U.S.-UN relationship has had ups and downs over all of these 67 years. I've come to expect that practically. Some of it is political. It goes with the tides of who's in the leadership. But I often I describe this, the causes of this tension, this misunderstanding, and so on, to 3 things. One is lack of education. In this country, the United Nations is almost not taught anymore. Textbooks are printed in Texas, where censors have deleted the United Nations from those history books. And those are sold all over America. So you have a cohort of young adults who come through high school and college without spending 10 minutes on the UN. They don't understand why it exists, how it functions, its limits or its possibilities. So except for people who major in international relations or take part in model UNs, the majority don't have any teaching about it at all. So education is key. Media is key. If the media wouldn't act like sheep, but rather would do some homework, would look into some of these issues, and would even 1 time in 10 report a good news story, I think we'd have a different response in the public. And then, of course, the 3rd thing is leadership. If you have a president, if you have governors, mayors, college presidents who speak about the UN, who respect it, who take note of UN Day, who bring UN speakers to their campus, who make it live and breathe, that would help too. I always make the case that the UN is not just some abstraction out there. It affects our national interest. our safety, our security, our health, our prosperity, our ability to travel and invest and trade abroad, and that our challenge is to use it wisely and well, acknowledge its strengths and address its weaknesses. But to the extent that this country stands back and turns away and dismisses and demeans the UN, that damages us and leaves us on the outside looking in. So I think there's a strong case to be made, even among conservatives, that it's to our advantage to make active use of the UN, visible, active, constructive use of the UN, and to have an ambassador, to have other State Department officials who respect it. I liked Obama's term when he first came in. He talked about the new era of engagement. Now, even Republicans and Democrats should both understand the importance of that. I also occasionally harken back to the beginning and to the bipartisan support of the UN in those early decades, and the importance of trying to regain that support today. It's doable, I think, but we need a lot of spokespeople who will address this to all kinds of audiences.
Thank you. Let me echo that. Yes, I am a Swede, but I'm also a New Yorker. I lived for 10 years there, and I'm a great friend of the US. That's why I'm so concerned to see how this country deals with the UN. I don't think that they see the writings on the wall in Washington. Are they aware of the enormous geopolitical shift that is undergoing? Look at the world's economy and see the predictions for the future. Maybe the day will come when the President of the United States of America will travel to Beijing with the UN Charter in his hand and say, well, we would like you to respect this charter. I must say, I'm amazed. The UN Charter was drafted by a generation that experienced 2 world wars. Twice, the Americans came across the Atlantic to assist us in Europe, where we had messed it up completely. We should be careful to study the wisdom of this charter. And the question I've asked sometimes is, why is it so difficult to transfer wisdom from one generation to another? Of course, if you go back to Sophocles and read the final choir or in Antigone, you will see that the issue is just actual today as it was 2,500 years ago. But I can give you a very good quote to emphasize what Gillian Sorensen just said. We just heard President Obama's 5th State of the Union. I have thought in all these 5 State of the Unions for 2 words: United Nations. They are absent. He doesn't dare. I think he would like to mention the UN. He doesn't dare because the way the UN is backtalked in this country today. But I have the following quote, it's my favorite, from an American president. Not only a Republican, but also a general. When Eisenhower was re-elected in 1956, he proudly goes before Congress in January '57. And what does he say about the United Nations? We Americans are aware of our involvement with humans everywhere. We are therefore pledged to honor and to strengthen the authority of the United Nations, because in that body rests the best hope of our age to assert the laws under which all nations can live in dignity. Where did that wisdom go?
Just one point. I served in Washington a number of years as ambassador, and then as World Bank between my service in the UN. There is a problem, and people are not stupid. They know that the UN is a useful tool, and there is no possibility for a UN Secretariat or Security Council or General Assembly to do something if the US is totally opposed. But again, in the UN we don't vote in the US, so we are seen as irrelevant, especially in New York mentality. And I remember a Swedish study, you may find it, 85, 84, because it comes down to money, you know, how UN costs to New York taxes and so on. And the Swedish study confirmed by then Ambassador General Walter that at that time, UN contribution to the US contribution to the UN budget was 25%, which was $250,000 million at that time. And the Swedish study shows that the UN make a net profit of $1 billion through the mission who are there, the rent, the conferences, the hotel, the tickets. And a journalist brought the question to General Walter, do you really believe the Swedes will say we make $1 billion? Because East Side hotels make 70% of their cash flow from September to December during General Assembly. Just 2 months, 70%. This is never reported, will never. But General Walter, to be back to him, said, well, it is not 1 billion, it is maximum 600 million. UN, I mean, the US make a net profit of 600 million, you know, not counting the 250 million. This is never reported, we never reported. And when Germany decided to go to Berlin and leave Bonn, you remember, they suggested that the UN move to Bad Godesberg, to Bonn. But it was another story. Of course, New York refused, and so. So there is a misunderstanding, miscommunication, and there is nothing we can do about it. It is not political, it is social. New York would like to yell, to cry, and so on. They are general, but they just don't like you, and they lie with it, they hate it, and it is part of a problem, in my opinion.
To bring this back to
you have to. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. But let me take a couple other questions then, and I'll save that for a final comment in a minute. Yeah. Can you pass the mic there?
My name is Robert Cohen, and I'm a member of the Brandeis Social Lifelong Learning Institute. And I can tell you that a lack of knowledge on the part of the younger generation may be overshadowed by a lack of knowledge in the older generation. I'm naive enough to believe that the United Nations was founded for 3 basic purposes. 1, to keep peace, 2, to save lives, and 3, to protect human rights. When I look back and I see what has happened in our lifetime and what the younger generation has seen, my memory is drawn to Rwanda, Somalia, Darfur, Biafra, Western Sahara, Kosovo, Serbia, the breakup of Yugoslavia, and the Mideast. And I don't see the UN effectiveness in any place except Serbia, Kosovo, and the breakup of Yugoslavia. And so I wonder whether or not there's a perception, number one, that Africa is not looked at in the right light by the United Nations members, and maybe enough attention isn't paid and hasn't been paid to what's happened in Africa. And I think that the younger generation also perceives, and in my opinion rightly so, that there is a total bias in the United Nations in the Mideast. And I think that the United Nations, before it looks outside, has to look inside and see what it can do to clean its own house. When it has members serving on human relations committees and commissions who are among the biggest violators of human rights, what kind of justice can you expect from those committees? And those are my feelings, and I'd like to have some comments on them.
Yeah, I'll take one more comment and then some last words. Yeah.
My name is Elio Mohandas. I'm a Haitian native. I thank Brian to be here and talk about the cholera outbreak in Haiti. I just want to bring this thing back to the cholera because I didn't get a satisfactory answer from any of you based on all the things that Brian said, and I know you guys are not the expert on the cholera outbreak in Haiti. But my concern is that it's not so much about the money that the Haitians are so mad about. It's just the precedence. The fact that we feel like, as they say in the United States, sometimes the minorities feel like second-class citizens, and as citizens of the world, sometimes Haitians feel like the second-class people. Before the UN came to Haiti, we never had cholera in Haiti. And all the scientific studies have proven that it came from the Nepalese soldiers who came to Haiti. Why is it so hard for the UN to just acknowledge that it is them that brought it to Haiti? I think from the beginning, if that was acknowledged, Haitians would have been able to get over it. Because the UN came to Haiti in 2004, and they did a good job preventing probably a civil war in Haiti. But 9 years, and we have an outbreak that's killing 8,000 people, that's a lot. If those people were not Haitians, let's say they were Americans, would it still be the same thing? So I know we have a weak government, but again, if organizations like the UN cannot stand up and set good precedents, Haitian people will continue to suffer from their own government. And that's a perfect case for the UN to show that they're bigger than, the average people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Final comments responding to anything further on Haiti and/or this whole larger question of the effectiveness of the United Nations in our time. Sure.
Okay. First, thank you. First of all, on Haiti, I don't have the insight, and it would not be appropriate for me to comment in detail. What I can say is that it is a tragedy that has visited Haiti. We can only imagine the sorrow and the situation for the families that have been visited by the cholera, so I'm not questioning about that. But I'm sure that they will find some way of dealing with this, and let's hope that if there's a fund set up, that can be used to assist the people. But your question brings me to the other comment here about the UN has to sort of shape up. Yes, but again then we come to the question, who is the UN? And I come back to the question, who needs reforming the most, the UN or its members? And here I agree with you, and in particular I am upset about the different yardstick that is used in the Middle East. And after Richard Goldstone's report on the Gaza conflict, I wrote a letter to the Security Council, and I said, I don't think you even have to read the report. The headlines in the newspapers are enough for you, Security Council, to realize that you should have a prosecutor looking at the situation here. Imagine the Middle East, somewhere in sub-Saharan Africa. Which state would be first on the barricades, thundering about investigations, prosecution, and so forth? Yes, the United States of America. But you see, for me, the word statesman has become the defining element here. When we look to the future, we need statesmen in the world, people who can look to the horizon. But there are hardly any around. And as I said, we have the heritage of the San Francisco conference back in '45, from the generation that experienced 2 world wars among so-called civilized nations. We can't repeat this. And what I'm concerned about is that there is no understanding about the need to prevent conflicts. Everybody's looking at Syria now. Where is the next Syria? I can promise you anywhere in the world, but there's no democracy and no rule of law. There is the next Syria. And then people will be staring at that, and everybody's looking at that, and the headlines are there, and then you forget about the old conflict. Prevention, that's what we need. And to prevent, you need to live by the rules. And who should reform this up? What about the attack on Iraq back in 2003? The US attacking Iraq in flagrant violation of the UN Charter, together with the UK. And of course in 2008, Russia attacked Georgia. And now we have Russia and China refusing to take appropriate action in Syria. This is why I recommend you reading my letter from 2008. Rule of law more important than additional members in the Council. They are set at the request of all members of the UN to have the responsibility for maintenance of international peace and security. They simply have to do their job. So if I place the burden or the, shall we say, what the UN is not succeeding to do, my first entity that I would look to would be the Security Council, and in particular the permanent 5 members. They hold the key to international peace and security. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And, in Europe, increasingly when there is a problem, they say it is Brussels. You know, the government in Italy, France, UK, Stockholm, they blame Brussels. And it is the same. When it doesn't work, people blame the UN. And I'm ending where I started. Increasingly, government have diluted power. I don't think the governments the world over have the same power they used to have 15, 20 years ago. Even big corporations don't have the same power. So it is civil society, it is individual, and I think we are increasingly going to not rule of law, but you have no more leadership. And people are running to be re-elected, and even if they are elected or re-elected, they cannot make a decision. By nature, I'm very optimistic, and I don't see any alternative to optimism. But I see government institution losing power more and more, losing credibility, and people not paying any attention to what they do. I don't see citizens, even in my part of the world where government used to have so much power, people are not listening to them. They don't care. They travel on their own. They are trying. So I think maybe we have to adapt to a new era where government, institution, even private company are losing power. And even if they have power, they cannot make decisions. Decision as we expect them. You take this great country when they discuss about how to call it, the cliff or whatever. Every region, every country has the same problem. No one makes decisions. And citizens don't care.
I think really the answer to Mr. Cohen's question and criticism lies, as Hans Corell has said, where the question is, what is the United Nations? It's all about politics. It's all about governments who act in what they conceive, sometimes wrongly, to be in their self-interest. Governments act in what they conceive to be their self-interest, and that's what they elected to do. Having said that, I don't think it's fair to lay any blame at the door of the UN for what happened in the former Yugoslavia, or Kosovo, or in the Middle East, or any of the other situations you've mentioned. If blame is to be cast, it's at the people who are leading those countries. It can't be, the blame can't be put at the door of the United Nations for not having prevented it. I wish there were mechanisms to stop that sort of conflict. And unfortunately, the world hasn't reached near that position. And I agree. More effort should be spent in trying to stop conflicts than to prevent conflicts, than waiting for them to break out and coming after the horses fled the stable. But I think the reality is to have a look at the politics, to have a look at leadership, and often lack of leaderships within nation states.
If you say, what is the UN? The UN, or who is the UN? The UN is us. The UN is a reflection of the will of the member states. And when those states are joined and committed and moving ahead, especially when the United States is fully committed, the chance of success is always greater. And I've seen that happen many times. But it does, your point does raise, it points to the limits of the United Nations. There are times where we cannot do what needs doing. The will is not there. The political will is missing. And so people will die. That said, At this moment, as we sit here now, the United Nations is looking after 20 million refugees. Now, I call that saving lives and sheltering lives. The UN is doing so many things that don't get credit and don't receive the respect it deserves. On the leadership question, there's a phrase called the leadership deficit, and it makes me wonder. My great hero, or one of my heroes, is Nelson Mandela. And I wondered, where are the other Nelson Mandelas across the African continent? Or for that matter, where is the Nelson Mandela in the Middle East, who is visionary, who can describe a different future and persuade his followers that that future is real and possible, and persuade people to put down their arms and to cooperate with the opposition? Where are those new leaders?
Probably in prison.
Maybe in prison, says. Yeah, that's possible. But whatever we can do, and whatever Brandeis does to generate and inspire those new leaders, is all to the good. Thank you, Dan, for this interesting conference.
Before I close, finally, I do want to give just one brief word to another board member who's represented the United Nations before his country, Venezuela. You want to make a brief comment, Diego, and then we'll close. Diego Arria of Venezuela.
I was tempted. I didn't hear the comment on former Yugoslavia. I think it's wonderful. I could not agree more with my colleagues here. But there are cases where the United States is to blame, and I think the faster it comes out and explain it better. It's the case of former Yugoslavia. Actually, I was a witness against Mr. Milosevic, and at one point, I accused the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Boutros Ghali, and I said that he did not disclose information that later on had consequences on the massacre of Srebrenica. And I think when I tried to make the point later on, when our friend Kofi was there, some of the people at the Secretariat said, if we come out openly, it will be like an exercise of self-flagellation, I remember. But, for example, Kofi Annan wrote the only confession of guilt, of repentance, of the organization ever written at the United Nations, precisely in the case of Rwanda and the case of Srebrenica. But that was to cure what had not been clear before during Boutros. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, what I've heard a great deal of over the course of this excellent conversation, thank you all very much for your participation, and it is a call for a kind of culture of self-scrutiny and transparency on the part of the United Nations, to be sure, but also on the part of its critics, of governments, of the press, that it's easy to find targets and to pass along blame, but that if the world is going to improve, all powerful players and institutions need to be willing to come forward, to accept responsibility, and to put in place public mechanisms for conversation about wrongdoing when it happens, and not only wrongdoing when it happens, but also acknowledgement of when things go right as well. And I wanted to say I very much appreciate the four of you, all of whom have served the United Nations, for being willing to come and talk about a kind of difficult issue in the context of the work that you've done, to share those thoughts and to open conversations that we'll be able to continue here as part of the work of the Center, both on campus and in the work that we do around the world. Please join me in thanking our panel.